Pregnancy is the time of the development of the new human. Pregnancy is all of the events that occur from the time of fertilization or conception until the infant is born. The developing offspring is called a conceptus. Gestation period is calculated from the last menstrual period to birth. This is the time of the development of the conceptus. It's 280 days. This means that we actually count the 2 weeks the woman is not pregnant as part of the gestation period. The first 8 weeks of the pregnancy, the conceptus is known as an embryo. From week 9 until birth, the conceptus is known as the fetus. Fertilization is the union of the sperm and the egg to produce a new cell known as a zygote. The oocyte is viable for 12 to 24 hours after ovulation, and the sperm is viable for 24 to 48 hours after ejaculation. This means that there is about a 3-day window for fertilization to occur, 2 days before ovulation and 1 day after ovulation. The sperm have a long trip to make from the vagina to the egg. Millions of sperm are ejaculated, and many never make it very far. Millions leak from the vagina and never even get as far as the cervix. The vagina has an acid environment that destroys millions more. The small fraction that make it through the cervix into the uterus find themselves swimming upstream. There are forceful uterine contractions that work against them. Also, these cells are foreign to the female immune system, so thousands are destroyed in the uterus by phagocytes. In the meantime, the oocyte has been gently sucked into the fallopian tube and is leisurely floating toward the uterus. The sperm deposited into the vagina are incapable of penetrating the ovum. They have to be capacitated. This is a biochemically delicate process that takes 2 to 10 hours. The first thing that has to happen is motility must increase. Then we have to make the membranes more fragile. This is so the acrosomal enzymes can be released. Cholesterol is what strengthens the membrane, so during the swim the cholesterol is depleted. Even if sperm are eager and get to the egg early, they still have to wait around for capacitation. If we didn't have this time limit on capacitation, the acrosomal enzymes might act too soon and they would act against the sperm, causing autolysis of the sperm. When the sperm get to the top of the cervix, they have a choice to make, left or right. Where's the egg? Well, it appears that sperm have olfactory proteins that help them find the egg so that they make the correct choice and go down the right fallopian tube. Once they get to the egg, they find that the ovum is encapsulated by several layers of cells and an extracellular matrix. The sperm have to penetrate both. Sperm have hyaluronidase. This allows them to break between the cells of the outer layer of cells and weave through the cells to get to the matrix. Once the sperm get to the matrix, they bind to receptors in the matrix layer. This causes calcium channels to open. Calcium will increase in the sperm, and this will activate the acrosomal enzymes. This is known as the acrosomal reaction. The enzymes from the acrosome of the sperm begin to break down the matrix layer. Now, one sperm alone can't make much progress, but thousands of sperm working together finally can break through the matrix. Once the ovum membrane is exposed, the sperm can enter. Only one sperm will fuse with the ovum matrix, then changes will occur that will not allow further sperm to penetrate. When the sperm and egg membranes fuse, the sperm cell contents enter the egg and the nuclei fuse. Polyspermy is the entrance of several sperm into one egg. This occurs in some animals, but humans experience monospermy, only one sperm per egg. In rare cases of polyspermy in humans, there's too much genetic material in the zygote and the embryos die. There are 2 blocks to polyspermy. The first block is the oocyte membrane block. Once one sperm binds to an oocyte sperm receptors, the rest of the receptors disappear from the surface of the oocyte. The other is the zona reaction. The sperm head entering causes the release of calcium. This does 2 things. It prepares the oocyte for completion of meiosis II, but it also causes the release of enzymes that further destroy sperm receptors. Any sperm that are bound to any of these destroyed receptors are detached. So if we look at a section of the ovum, here's the layer of cells and here's the matrix. The sperm approach, and they break in between the cells of the outer cellular layer. Then as the acrosomal enzymes are released, they digest their way through the matrix. Now this is showing one sperm doing this, but thousands of sperm are involved in breaking through this matrix. Once a sperm can bind to the receptor of the membrane of the oocyte, the membranes fuse and the nucleus of the sperm enters. Once the nucleus here enters, then the nucleus of the newly formed oocyte will merge with it and we will have a zygote. The entrance of the sperm is going to be what triggers the completion of meiosis II in the egg. We get the two new nuclei, they fuse, and we have the new diploid organism, the zygote. Cleavage is a period of fairly rapid mitotic divisions of the zygote. Within 36 hours after fertilization, the first cleavage occurs. By 72 hours, we have a loose ball of cells that are known as a morula. Within 4 to 5 days, this ball of cell hollows out and becomes a blastocyst. The outer cells are called trophoblast cells. There is a small cluster of interior cells that are called the inner mass. The trophoblast will begin to take part in placenta formation. The inner cells are the ones that become the embryonic disc. These are the cells that will form the embryo, and they also form 3 of the 4 extraembryonic membranes. The chorion is the 4th membrane, and it's the one produced by the trophoblast. Once the blastocyst gets to the uterus, it floats in the uterine cavity for 2 to 3 days. Here it's nourished by secretions from the uterus. Implantation occurs 6 to 7 days after ovulation. There is a window of implantation. It occurs as a result of the surging levels of ovarian hormones. The trophoblast will bind to the endometrium at special binding cells. The endometrium will thicken at the point of contact. The trophoblast will invade the endometrium, the blastocyst burrows in, and the endometrial cells will cover the implanted blastocyst. This takes about 5 days. It should be completed by about day 26 of the cycle. This is just before the endometrium would be sloughed if the hormones are not maintained. If implantation fails for some reason, the endometrium becomes non-responsive. About 2/3 of blastocysts fail to implant or spontaneously abort. 30% of all implanted blastocysts later miscarry. Ovulation occurs and the egg is sucked into the fallopian tube. The sperm find it about 1/3 of the way down the fallopian tube, and if fertilization occurs, we'll have our first cleavage. Cleavage will continue until we get our morula. All of this will occur in the fallopian tube. And then we will get our blastocyst. We will have the trophoblast cells, and we will have the inner mass of cells. Here is a more mature blastocyst. The blastocyst will float in here for a couple of days and then find a location on the endometrial wall and will burrow in and be covered over. The trophoblasts are the cells that produce HCG. This is the hormone that maintains the corpus luteum so that we maintain progesterone and don't lose the endometrial lining. Placentation is the formation of the placenta. The placenta originates from both maternal and embryonic tissues and acts as the organ of exchange between the fetus and the mother. The trophoblast makes the outer extrauterine membrane, the chorion. The chorionic villi become elaborate where they are in contact with the maternal blood. The placenta is fully functional by the end of the 3rd month. HCG produced by the trophoblast and then later by the placenta helps maintain the corpus luteum. This keeps our progesterone levels up. The placenta will eventually produce its own progesterone and estrogen. If it fails to do so, the placenta will deteriorate and the pregnancy will end in miscarriage. The placenta also produces other hormones like human placenta lactogen and relaxin. Ovulation occurs and fertilization occurs, and because we get trophoblast cells, we will have this peak of human chorionic gonadotropin. This will help maintain the progesterone levels. Now these will dip after about the first trimester, HCG will dip, but by that time the placenta will be making its own progesterone and several estrogens. This helps maintain the placenta and the pregnancy. So this crossing over point occurs just at the end of the first trimester. And this is when a lot of pregnancies end in miscarriage. If this doesn't happen at just the right time, this is where miscarriage will occur. Here you see the developing embryo, the umbilical cord. These are the layers of the placenta. And here, this outer layer, the chorion, where it's closely attached to the maternal bloodstream, you have these chorionic villi. Now here's the maternal arteries and veins. They develop blood vessels that went into that endometrial lining. And they will pump blood into this little space right here. The umbilical arteries and vein will have capillaries in here. And the blood, the material from the maternal blood, will be able to cross the capillary barriers so that we can exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen and nutrients and waste products between the fetal blood and the maternal blood. The extraembryonic membranes form during the first 2 to 3 weeks of pregnancy. The cells of the epiblast form a thin membrane around the embryo that's broken only by the umbilical cord. This is the amnion, and this sac will fill with fluid, the amniotic fluid. The yolk sac forms from cells of the primitive gut. The allantois is a small outpocket of the yolk sac. It's the structural base for the umbilical cord. And then the chorion comes from the trophoblast cells. This is the exchange membrane. During week 3, the 2-layered embryonic disc becomes a 3-layered embryo. The 3 layers are the ectoderm, which will give rise to nervous tissue and epidermal derivatives, the mesoderm, which gives rise to most of the organs, muscle, and bone, and the endoderm, which gives rise to the epithelium of the hollow organs and the digestive glands. By the end of the embryonic period, this is the end of week 8, all organ systems are identifiable and pretty much in place. The umbilical cord has 2 umbilical arteries and 1 umbilical vein. The vein carries oxygen and nutrients to the fetus, and the arteries carry waste away from the fetus. This is the link between the fetus and the placenta. The umbilical vein enters the fetus and becomes the ductus venosus. This empties into the inferior vena cava, which will empty into the right atrium of the heart. Since we don't really need to send blood to the lungs of the developing fetus, blood will shunt from the left atrium to the right atrium via the foramen ovale. Blood that gets into the pulmonary trunk, which does not need to go to the lungs, will shunt into the aorta via the ductus arteriosus. The umbilical arteries branch from the internal iliac arteries to return blood to the placenta. So the blood going to and from the placenta, here we see the ductus venosus, bringing oxygenated and nutrient-rich blood to the fetus. The blood will come into the right atrium. A lot will go straight over to the left atrium so it can go to the aorta and the body. Any that gets into the pulmonary trunk will use the ductus arteriosus to get into the aorta. That way, most blood circulates to the fetus. We send just enough blood to the lungs to make sure it develops. At birth, we will have changes in the newborn's circulatory system. All of these internal blood vessels will clamp down immediately, and they become various ligaments that help support the urinary bladder and the liver. By the end of the embryonic period, week 8, the bones have begun to ossify, the muscles are well formed and contracting, the kidneys are developing, the gonads are formed, the lungs and digestive organs are taking on shape and location. Blood delivery to and from the placenta is constant and efficient, and the heart and liver are developing. So we've really laid down all of the major organ structures in the embryonic period. During the fetal period, there is a tremendous amount of growth. Cells continue to differentiate during the first half of the fetal period, and then organ systems refine and complete their development during the second half of the fetal period. While things are happening for the fetus, there are some things going on with mom as well. The female reproductive organs become increasingly vascular and engorged with blood. Many times, obstetricians don't have to wait for a positive pregnancy test to tell that a woman is pregnant. The vaginal exam will show the purplish hue of the vagina known as Chadwick's sign. The vagina also increases in sensitivity and sexual intensity. There is increased estrogen and progesterone that causes the breast to mature and enlarge. The uterus dramatically changes in size. It starts out as an organ the size of your fist. By the end of the pregnancy, it fills the pelvic cavity and is crowding the abdominal organs. The center of gravity changes for the woman because she now is carrying a lot more weight in front. As a result, she tends to lean back more. This causes lordosis and backaches. Relaxin, which is secreted by the placenta, causes the pubic symphysis and the pelvic ligaments to loosen. This means that everything gets a little looser in the pelvic region. The hips loosen up, the knees loosen up, and this causes the gait to change. There is a weight gain, usually about 28 to 30 pounds. Good nutrition is critical because only 300 additional calories per day are needed. It's not necessary to eat a lot of food, but you do need to eat high quality food. Besides the anatomical changes, there are also metabolic changes in the mother. The placenta secretes hormones. One of the hormones is human placental lactogen or human chorionic somatomammatropin. This hormone works cooperatively with estrogens and progesterone to stimulate maturation of the breast. It also promotes fetal growth and helps exert glucose-sparing effects in the mother. Gestational diabetes occurs in about 10% of pregnancies. 2% of these mothers will go on to develop type 2 diabetes later in life. Plasma levels of parathyroid hormone and activated vitamin D rise. This helps the mother maintain a positive calcium balance throughout the pregnancy as the baby's bones are developing. Physiological changes that occur in the mother include changes to the gastrointestinal tract. First, there's morning sickness, the nausea and vomiting during the first few months. This is believed to be related to rising levels of hormones, human chorionic gonadotropin, estrogens, and progesterone. Heartburn develops as the baby pushes upward. The esophagus becomes displaced and the stomach gets crowded. And constipation occurs. The baby sitting on the intestine tends to slow the motility of the digestive tract. In the urinary system, there's much more urine produced. Also, stress incontinence becomes more of a problem the larger the uterus gets. In the respiratory system, the nasal mucosa responds to estrogen. This tends to make it edematous and also rather fragile. Nosebleeds may occur. The mother's tidal volume increases, not her respiratory rate, but the amount of air she moves with each respiration. In later stages of the pregnancy, women experience dyspnea, difficulty breathing, because the baby is pushing everything upward and even crowding the lungs a little bit. In the cardiovascular system, the total body water rises dramatically. This means that blood volume increases. Cardiac output increases, and there may be elevations in blood pressure. The uterus will press on the pelvic blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. This will impair blood return from the legs, causing varicose veins and edema in the legs. Also, there is a greater chance of developing hemorrhoids because of the constipation and the reduced blood flow. Teratogens are harmful substances that cross the placenta, enter the fetal blood, and damage the fetus. There's a group of infections that can be remembered as storch. Then we have to worry about alcohol, nicotine, and drugs. Storch stands for syphilis, toxoplasma, others like HIV or hepatitis B, rubella, cytomegalovirus, and herpes. Women are typically checked for all of these diseases early in pregnancy to make sure that none of these will be a problem for the fetus. Fetal alcohol syndrome occurs in mothers who drink heavily during their pregnancy. The baby is born with microencephalopathy, a very small head, and intellectual disability. They also show abnormal growth. Nicotine means that the mother is smoking. Carbon monoxide likes hemoglobin a whole lot better than oxygen likes hemoglobin, so this will hinder oxygen delivery to the fetus. This results in low birth weight babies and very poor tissue development. A number of drugs are contraindicated during pregnancy, including something as benign as tetracycline. The worst drug reaction seen was probably the one to thalidomide. Thalidomide was a drug that was given to mothers for morning sickness. It was actually an antidepressant, but it was discovered that it would help with morning sickness. This was given in the 1950s. It was quickly stopped in this country, but it continued to be given in Europe for several years. Babies who came from thalidomide mothers failed to develop limbs. They had bodies, they had torsos and heads, but they had poorly developed arms and legs. Preeclampsia is a dangerous complication of pregnancy. It indicates that there's a deterioration of the placenta and insufficient placental blood supply. The fetus becomes starved for oxygen. The mother becomes edematous and hypertensive, and protein spills in the urine. Proteinuria occurs. This occurs in about 1 in 10 pregnancies. We really don't understand why, but it may be an immunological abnormality. Parturition means bringing forth young. This is the process of childbirth. Labor is the series of events that expel the infant from the uterus. The initiation of labor requires several hormones and events to interlock. Estrogen peaks, and as estrogen peaks, this increases oxytocin receptors on the uterus. This also antagonizes the quieting effects of progesterone. Progesterone sort of downplays uterine muscular activity. The myometrium becomes irritable. Irregular uterine contractions begin. These are known as Braxton-Hicks contractions. Sometimes these are so strong that they send women to the hospital and they're sent away because they're in false labor. Fetal cells begin to produce oxytocin. This causes the placenta to also produce prostaglandins. Both of these are strong muscle stimulants. Increasing cervical distension causes the hypothalamus to get involved and start releasing oxytocin. Once the hypothalamus is involved, labor is going to ensue. The contractile forces increase and true labor will start. There are 3 stages of labor: dilation, expulsion, and placental. In the dilation stage, this is from labor's onset to full dilation. The cervix opens to approximately 10 centimeters. This is the longest stage, lasting 6 to 12 hours or more. Contractions increase in time and duration, and they get stronger. The infant's head is forced against the cervix. At some point in time, the water breaks. This is the amniotic fluid being released from the amnion. The baby's head enters the true pelvis, something that's called engagement. The second stage of labor is the expulsion stage. This lasts from full dilation of the cervix to delivery of the infant. Strong contractions occur every 2 to 3 minutes, and they last about a minute at a time. Women experience the urge to bear down. This stage of labor may last 2 hours, but usually lasts about 50 minutes in a first-time mother and about 20 minutes in subsequent births. This is when crowning occurs. The head visibly distends the vulva. At this time, an episiotomy may be done. This is a small cut to help prevent tearing of the vagina. The infant usually comes vertex, head first. This allows the head to be delivered first, and mucus can be suctioned from the mouth, and the infant can start to breathe. A breech birth is when the baby comes buttock first. Other non-vertex presentations can include shoulder first or leg first. These deliveries are more difficult, and the advantage of suctioning the mouth and letting the infant breathe is lost. Dystocia means difficult labor. This is usually due to either a malformed or narrow male-like pelvis. If labor is allowed to go too long, extreme maternal fatigue can occur. This means that when it's time to push, the mother has no energy to do so. It also can result in fetal brain damage. As the head of the fetus continues to try to come through the narrow birth canal, it gets brain damage. This can lead to cerebral palsy or epilepsy later in life. A C-section or cesarean section is performed to remove the baby through the uterine wall rather than having it come through the vagina. The final stage of labor is the placental stage. This is the delivery of the placenta and the attached fetal membranes. It's also known as the afterbirth. This typically occurs within 30 minutes of delivery. Strong uterine contractions continue after the baby has been pushed out. This helps compress the uterine blood vessels and reduces bleeding. Physicians always want to make sure the entire placenta has been delivered. Any remaining pieces may cause severe postpartum bleeding. The placenta is checked to make sure all of the membranes look normal and that the blood vessels from the umbilicus look normal. The stages of labor start with dilation, the baby's head engaging. Here we see the baby engaged. Then expulsion as the baby's head extends, and then finally delivery of the placenta. Once the baby is out of the uterus, there are some adjustments that must be made. The first 4 weeks of life are known as the neonatal period. Now, as soon as the baby is out, it gets tested. It's checked at 1 minute and 5 minutes, and it's given an APGAR score. The score is from 1 to 5. The infant's heart rate, respiration, color, muscle tone, and reflexes are checked. The baby either gets a 1 or a 0 in each category. A score of 5 is good in every category. A lower score indicates that one or more things are not as they should be. The baby has to take its first breath. Once the umbilical cord is cut, the baby no longer has mother's blood to get the oxygen from. Carbon dioxide builds up in the baby's blood and the baby is forced to inhale. It opens up the lungs for the first time. Surfactant helps keep the alveoli open so that the lungs don't collapse. Infants breathe about 45 times per minute. The first 6 to 8 hours of life are known as a transitional period. Vital signs will fluctuate during this time, and the baby gags repeatedly and regurgitates mucus. Within 30 minutes, the fetal blood vessels have constricted and become those ligaments. The foramen ovale closure usually is complete within the first year of life. Lactation is the production of milk by the mammary glands. Rising placental hormones stimulate the anterior pituitary. Prolactin is released to stimulate milk production. The first secretion, the first 2 or 3 days, are colostrum. Colostrum is not true milk, but it's high in a number of things that the baby needs. After birth, prolactin release gradually wanes. The continued milk production relies on a suckling infant. Oxytocin is also necessary to release milk. So to start, once the baby starts sucking, that stimulates mechanoreceptors. This causes the hypothalamus to release prolactin-releasing factors. We get the anterior pituitary to secrete prolactin, and we get milk production. After that, the continued suckling of the infant causes the hypothalamus to send oxytocin, which gives us the letdown reflex. Milk is ejected. We start getting this positive feedback mechanism where the more the baby sucks, the more oxytocin, the more milk, the more letdown. So we have this going on. Once the baby is weaned, we cut the positive feedback mechanism. There are some advantages to breastfeeding. Fats and irons in breast milk are better absorbed and the amino acids are metabolized more efficiently. There are also many beneficial chemicals in breast milk, things like IgA, lysozyme, and interferon. Also, breast milk helps beneficial bacteria colonize the infant's gut more quickly, and breast milk acts as a natural laxative. Some people have difficulty conceiving. In some instances, drugs can be given that will boost egg or sperm production. But for these people, these don't work. Assisted reproductive technology, or ART, are procedures that assist with infertility. One is in vitro fertilization. Here, oocytes and sperm are harvested from each individual. They're incubated outside the body, embryos developed, and these are transferred to the womb. In zygote intrafallopian transfer, or ZIFT, the fertilized oocytes are immediately transferred to the uterine tube. It's hoped that they will then make their normal journey and implant on the walls of the uterus. Gamete intrafallopian transfer, or GIFT, has the sperm and the harvested oocytes transferred to the uterine tube. It lets fertilization and everything occur naturally from that point on. While cloning is a possibility, cloning cells has been much more successful in treating selected diseases than in making a new human.